Hello, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to our Foreign Policy Talk series. This is a joint initiative of the Center for International European Studies at Kadir Has University, together with UIC Panorama, the International Relations Council of Turkey Panorama Initiative. It's a series that started online during the quarantine in the spring, where we've already had 3 webinars dealing with Greek-Turkish relations, the Black Sea, and other issues. And here's our first fall seminar. And of course, given the situation developments in the South Caucasus, we decided that our first fall seminar would be about the South Caucasus. So without further ado, I'll give the floor to Mustafa Aydin, who will be moderating the session to introduce the speakers and go on with the webinar. Mustafa.
Thank you, Dimitri. It's nice to be back with this Foreign Policy Talk series. And of course, it's nice to have friends joining us from different parts of the world. Although we are not able to be together face to face, we are together nevertheless through this online event. Of course, unfortunately, we are again going to talk about a crisis, a flare-up in the Caucasus, a warfare, a conflict that has been actually going on for some time. Not only the recent flare-up between Azerbaijan and Armenia, but we are going to dig up a little bit deeper to look into the Nagorno-Karabakh issue, dispute, problem, however you like to define it. Today we have 3 speakers with us. All of them actually have been veterans of the Caucasus and the wider area. They have been working and talking about these issues from different angles and on different institutions. But let me introduce them very briefly. We have Nicu Popescu, who is currently Director of Wider Europe Program in European Council on Foreign Relations. He was a Foreign Minister and European Integration Minister of Moldova in 2019. But we go back quite a long time with Nicu. He's been around the Black Sea, among the crowd of the Black Sea learners. And he brings always the table a different, somewhat definitely interesting position and observations regarding Caucasus and also the Caucasus, Black Sea. Then we have Brenda Schaffer. She is also no stranger to the region, having worked almost every aspect of the region. When I met her, I think I met her in Iran for the first time. She was working on the energy issues at the time. She is currently Senior Fellow, Atlantic Council, and also Research Faculty Member of U.S. Naval Postgraduate School. And she was just telling us that she's writing a book currently. So we'll be looking forward to read it. She has been involved in the Caucasus, especially in Azerbaijan and energy issues. And she has widely traveled, of course, to the region a number of times and written quite extensively. And finally, we have Mithat Çelikpala of Kadir Has University, our own guy here in Istanbul. He's currently Vice Rector of Kadir Has University, but also Professor of International Relations at the Department of International Relations. He also is somebody who has traveled extensively in the region. I think there is no place in the mountains in 3 Caucasus countries that he hasn't been to. So he's also a very suitable person tonight to delve into all this issue. Tonight, in Istanbul at least, tonight, we are going to talk about Karabakh, Nagorno-Karabakh, and trying to see, try to enlighten us, first of all, but also our audience. What is at stake? What's happening? Why it's happening? Why now? People are asking these kind of questions. Why now? Why after all these years? We were told that this was a frozen conflict. When it's unfrozen, why it's unfrozen? And what can we do now to move towards future? We had some talk among ourselves. Everybody knows what their role are. So I'm not going to tell you what their role. You will understand when you start listening them. Let me start with Nico here. We agreed that the speakers will have about 8 to 10 minutes first, and we'll go into the second round and the questions. Nico, would you like to start now?
Thank you, Mustafa, Dimitrios. It's great to see so many friends, both on the panel and among the attendees. I presumably 3 weeks into this new outbreak of a new small war around Nagorno-Karabakh, I guess we don't have to do the basics. So I'll quickly throw in a couple of observations that would help us analyze the situation. And to do that, I will go to a rule of conflict settlement formulated by Jonathan Powell, who was the chief negotiator of the conflict settlement in Northern Ireland and one of the architects of the Good Friday Agreement. And his formula is that you get the settlement of a conflict has a chance when the sides in this conflict are engaged in a mutually hurting stalemate. So this is when both sides have an interest to find a way to settle a conflict. And we obviously did not have this situation in Nagorno-Karabakh, and that is why the conflict has been erupting once in a while. And we had a stalemate, a status quo, where Armenia, which basically won the war, which ended in '94, was not in a situation of a hurting stalemate. Armenia considered itself in a favorable position, and it was very hard to find the internal energy and acceptance in Armenian society to start moving on towards the implementation of the Madrid principles. On the other hand, we had a stalemate which was very hurtful for Azerbaijan. And as we could see, Azerbaijan has been very open about its desire to redo and remake the status quo, ideally through negotiations, but if not, the message has been clear for over a decade that if the status quo is not changed through negotiations, the risk of war and military action is much greater. So this is where we were. It's very often in the post-Soviet space that people get surprised, with new surprises of new military actions, or, sometimes people get surprised by Russia, sometimes people get surprised by Armenia, Azerbaijan. But very often people have been saying, and leaders have been saying what they are going to do, more or less explicitly and openly. And that's one of those cases where this probability of a new war, outbreak of the war, has been there on the cards and everyone knew it. I'll say a couple of things also about Russia and the EU. I've been looking, of course, carefully at the Russian messaging in the last 3 weeks, and I see what is on the surface a huge paradox. I will explain it, and it's not surprising, but it's nonetheless a paradox. If you go back to 2013, when Ukraine was preparing to sign an association agreement with the European Union and have a free trade area, if you went to the Russian MFA website and you listened to Russian foreign policymakers, it looked like it's the end of a geopolitical era. It was daily news in Russia what's happening with Europe's and Ukraine's desire to sign a free trade area. It was presented in Russia as a major geopolitical catastrophe for Russia if Ukraine trades more with the European Union, which is quite absurd, but that is how it was presented. Even today, if you go on the Russian MFA website, you will see that there is a special section dedicated to Ukraine, a special section dedicated to Syria, but no special section dedicated to the current outbreak of the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh. The paradox here is that if you look at Russian foreign policy messaging today, you have a situation where a Russian military ally, a member of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, a member of the Eurasian Union, is engaged in a war with Azerbaijan and with possible contributions from elsewhere, as you know. And yet, Russian diplomacy is not outraged. Russian diplomacy is not rushing to defend its ally. Now, of course, legally, Nagorno-Karabakh and the occupied territories of Azerbaijan are not supposed to be militarily protected by the CSTO agreement, but still it's a Russian ally in a warlike situation, and Russia has been very neutral. It's very obvious Russia is maintaining this neutrality line between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Presumably, I expect that some Russian red lines have been communicated to Azerbaijan. It's clear that the Armenian internationally recognized border is a red line. But basically, it looks, my interpretation of Russian foreign policy is that basically Russia offers some space of time, if you want, and freedom of maneuver for Azerbaijan to start recapturing some territories. I am not very sure if this includes Nagorno-Karabakh region itself, but it's obvious that Russia does not mind if Azerbaijan starts recapturing parts of the 7 districts around Nagorno-Karabakh. And the Russian calculation there seems to be that if Azerbaijan does so and Russia does not interfere too much, Azerbaijan will be a grateful neighbor for quite some time, and Armenia has nowhere to go. Armenians will have to accept that. France might be more supportive of Armenia in foreign policy statements, but Moscow knows, Yerevan knows that France will not send troops to Armenia, and the only country which would send troops to defend Armenia if the calculation is right is Russia. So even if the Armenians will be unhappy with this Russian neutrality for a while, they don't have a lot of alternatives. That's the Russian calculation, which allows them to see in the next stages both a friendly Azerbaijan that recaptures territory and an Armenia that has no choice but stay a more or less loyal Russian ally, even if Armenian public opinion will, of course, not be very positive about these developments. But as you know, not all governments care equally about public opinion abroad, especially. The European Union, the European Union is not in a very good position. In 2009, I published a book called The EU and the Post-Soviet Conflicts. It had a chapter which was called the European Union's non-involvement in Nagorno-Karabakh. And nothing changed from what I wrote about the EU role in Nagorno-Karabakh in the last 11 years. I reopened the chapter now, and it stands. You can easily republish it. Now, the European Union has tried to play a role in Nagorno-Karabakh and Abkhazia and South Ossetia around 2005-2006. It managed to play a slightly bigger role in Georgia's conflict. In Azerbaijan, the EU could not do that. Azerbaijan was not very eager to have the European Union on board for several reasons, and we can dig into that. Armenia was not pushing very hard either. With time, Azerbaijan was very reluctant of letting the European Union go inside the conflict zone to do post-conflict rehabilitation. And the EU has been doing that for a while in South Ossetia and Abkhazia and Transnistria, but it was not allowed to do that in Nagorno-Karabakh by Baku for reasons that we can discuss, and they are understandable. The EU offered peacekeepers, but as we know, there has been no progress on the Madrid principles, and there is no serious conversation about peacekeepers. And even if there is, I think it's not very clear which peacekeepers the sides would want. We will see. But basically, the EU is not in a position that makes it a very strong player at this stage. But that's primarily because, unlike Georgia or Moldova, which asked for greater EU involvement in conflict settlement, neither Armenia nor Azerbaijan really wanted such a role. What comes next? 1 minute, maybe. I think that it's very clear to everyone that lands have to change hands. How much and through what means is not clear, but without a move where Azerbaijan regains significant parts of its 7 districts, there will be other wars. I think that's also increasingly clear in Armenia, and this war will hopefully also re-energize diplomacy. But now the question is, at what stage do we arrive to a stalemate that hurts both Armenia and Azerbaijan, so that talks have a chance? And in theory, that stalemate is a situation where Armenia got the message and starts moving on the Madrid principles, but Azerbaijan also understands that it cannot capture all of it through force because it's too costly and it's too difficult, and therefore the talks are a preferable way to regain control of what is legally Azerbaijani territory. So that is, I think, the prospects. Thank you.
Thank you, Nico. That was a great start. As you would all have understood by now, I asked Nico to talk about the role of EU-Russia as well, and as well as his views on the conflict. So let's go to Brenda. And in addition to the general atmosphere and what you are seeing is happening in the region, I also asked Brenda to talk a little bit more about US, Israel, and if possible, Iranian positions also. Brenda, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you. I'm very happy to be a part of this and to see old friends. I'm a bit jealous that you're in Istanbul. I'm thinking of a Friday evening in Istanbul, and the weather's even nice and clear and warm, but not hot. So I really would prefer we would be actually conducting this seminar in Istanbul itself. I think to understand the current developments in the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict, first of all, we need to look at this as round 2 of fighting that began in July. You can't really understand it if you don't look also at that round that took place. So what happened in July, for a wider audience, Armenia attacked military and civilian positions in the north of Azerbaijan, 300 kilometers north of the current conflict zone, very close to the pipeline corridor, to all the major energy and transport corridors. This is weeks before the full corridor is supposed to become operational. And in fact, even this week, TAP opened. It probably would have been a much bigger ceremonial event if a war wasn't taking place. But Armenia tried to capture hills that really basically overlook the corridor and could threaten the corridor. And this was probably in coordination with Russia, a strong message, I think, to the United States that not clear that the United States could understand this message, but after the US basically froze Nord Stream very close to its completion, here's sort of an attack on or near the American project, which is the Southern Gas Corridor into Europe. And also I think it could create an attempt to create some commercial chill as Azerbaijan and the investors, partners start to look into the second stage of development. The second, and I totally echo what Nico said about that, actually leaders often say what they mean and you should listen to them, and they do it. A year and a half ago, Armenia's defense minister, David Tonunyan, articulated very clearly a doctrine, new wars for new territories. And the idea was that it was clear that there's somewhat of a military stalemate, trenches, soldiers face to face in the line of contact in the occupied territories. 2016, maybe even Azerbaijan has a military advantage. So try to move the war to other parts of Azerbaijan. And he said it very openly, make the Azerbaijan fear that if they try to make any move to recapture their territories, that they actually can lose additional territories at the undisputed borders with Azerbaijan. And something that was a bit overlooked, but this week we understand now what that was. During July, and a lot of media didn't report this, but Nakhchivan was shelled as well. It wasn't just the Tovuz region in the north, but Nakhchivan as well. So basically showing Azerbaijan, or trying to show Azerbaijan, that the whole country is vulnerable to the Armenian military. And Armenian officials, I was pretty surprised, have actually even confirmed that, that they initiated this on the eve of the pipeline opening. And so what we have is a situation that obviously Azerbaijan couldn't leave that kind of strategic vulnerability where a new front had just been opened, Nakhchivan had been shelled. I don't know who initiated the current round of fighting, but clearly it was a situation that was intolerable to Azerbaijan to not have a response and change this new strategic reality that Armenia had established in July. It had to be changed, so I think you definitely need to see this is stage two of a two-staged rounds of fighting. So first, a little bit, what are some of the energy aspects here? So one, I pointed out part of the background, the opening of TAP, U.S. freezing of Nord Stream. But what we learn, I think, from the last couple of years of conflicts, and this is especially relevant to Turkey, is that cross-border pipelines are largely immune to conflicts. So even with the crisis between Russia and Turkey after the downing of a Russian plane, you had freezing of tourism, freezing of vegetable trade, but the gas flow continued undisrupted. It was too important to both sides. Is Turkey an important Russian market? Turkey needing at the time those Russian gas supplies. So the pipeline was immune. Or UAE, Qatar, even when they have political arguments, cutting off, gas flows. Algeria, Morocco, the international pipeline of Algeria goes to Southern Europe, goes through Morocco. Morocco, even at times, they're basically having a proxy war between them. So the physical pipelines are more secure, especially most of them being underground, than in the past. And even we were just talking earlier that even Greece and Turkey might be having a standout down in the East Med. That doesn't stop gas going from Turkey into Greece, and doesn't even stop the opening of a pipeline of TAP that unites even more and integrates even more Greece and Turkey. But I do think if there will be, we're seeing that Armenia, as it has additional losses and unexpected losses, it's upping the ante. So, for instance, when it lost territories, attacking civilian populations like in Ganja in Azerbaijan itself and from Armenian territory, so escalating this way. I think the next escalation will be actually specific acts of terrorism. And so this could affect, it could affect pipelines in Turkey and Georgia. It could affect infrastructure in Azerbaijan, large crowded public places in Baku. There's even been the government has warned people not to gather in large places because of a higher alert for terrorism. So I think we will see more terrorism attempts as well as the fighting continues. And this could be in Turkey itself, targeted on the infrastructure. If you recall, August 2008, the BTC was attacked near the Erzincan and part of the pipeline that is above ground. So this could happen again. Another energy aspect is we're seeing what I would call the weaponization of energy infrastructure. So operational energy was always a part of wars, right? Getting your energy to supply your troops, energy to keep your economy functioning. But now we're actually seeing energy infrastructure turned into a weapon. So one is the missile attacks near the Mingişehir Dam, that if this was, it's not likely that it would exploded. It's quite well protected, and it's supposed to withstand earthquakes. But if they had good luck and hit in the right place, you could see really the killing of thousands of people and the flooding of, maybe 20% of Azerbaijan's territory, ruining, farmland and towns and villages. And then last in July, although it was retracted by the government, a lower level official in the Ministry of Defense of Azerbaijan had said, if Armenia attacks our Mingişehir Dam, we're going to attack their nuclear power plant. So again, this was retracted, but again, because the stakes are so high, we need to make sure that these infrastructure are out of the game, whether it's a dam or it's a nuclear power plant, Armenia's nuclear power plant. I'll leave to others to talk about Russia, but I just maybe to relate to two things that we hear a lot in the media, that this idea that Russia is distracted. Anyone who thinks Russia is too distracted to deal with the South Caucasus doesn't know Russia. Putin's never distracted. He will always pull a rabbit out of the hat. Who among us anticipated Russian troops in Syria, but one morning wake up to it? There will always be a rabbit pulled out, pulled out of the Russian hat. And South Caucasus is probably more important than any other flashpoint that Russia is dealing with. Iran, I think underreported, but probably the biggest potential impact beyond Armenia and Azerbaijan for any of the regional powers is on Iran. We talk a lot about Russia, talk a lot about Turkey, but it's actually Iran. One, physically, there's somewhat of a spillover of the fighting into Iranian territory. But two, the main thing, a third of the population of Iran is ethnic Azerbaijani. And well, they have, the group is huge and very split, some very integrated into the Iranian system, some neutral, and some outright, very nationalistic as Turks, as Azerbaijani Turks. But war, changes people, and it's probably all of you are feeling on the different social media and seeing, the really blatant evidence, including on the Iranian media in Azerbaijani language out of Tabriz, of trucks. Russia doesn't share a land border with Armenia, so its supplies are going through Iran. They're landing at Iran's Caspian port and then taken by truck. By the way, even the contractor, I saw an interview with him, the contractor for these trucks is actually an Iranian Azerbaijani, and showed the contract and stuff. So showing these trucks, going into Armenia. This has really incensed the Iranian Azerbaijanis, and it might be something that has huge implications for the regime. It's like how many times can you say you have Islamic solidarity, not only when Zarif goes hands in hands in China, but also when Azerbaijanis are getting killed, they can almost physically, they're going to the Hudafarin area and overlooking and seeing Azerbaijani troops get killed and say, oh yeah, they have some solidarity with Muslims and Shia. So I think domestically there might be a huge price here for Iran. It's Mustafa, thank you for asking me to talk about the US. I won't take a lot of time because there's nothing to talk about. Basically hardly engaged, hardly involved. That's pretty sad. The only thing that is very difficult that, so all of us who follow this region, we know that this conflict has nothing to do with religion. In fact, religious figures are actually modifying figures in both Armenia and Azerbaijan. Both societies are highly secular, and if you look at the alliances, one side Azerbaijan, Turkey, Iran, the other side Armenia, Iran, Russia. It's hard to say these are in any way, on cultural or religious lines. The only place that religion seems to be influencing the policy is the United States, where I think the Armenian American lobby has done a very good job at trying to portray this as a Christian conflict, and that the U.S. should support Christians. And there are a lot of groups in the U.S. that matters to them. And so if it's influencing anyone's policy, it's the U.S. And I find that pretty sad. That's not the United States that I grew up in, that its foreign policy is based on, sort of a Christian line. And I hope that will be caught and reversed, because that's really not the American way. For Israel, I think there's some interesting things happening, and especially things that could maybe affect even Israel-Turkish relations. So obviously very strong support from Israel for Azerbaijan. Very clear, Turkey and Israel are on the same side here. And the question, maybe it's a question I asked to you and to the audience, does this create more of an opportunity for Turkey and Israel to improve its relations, cooperation? Bottom line, in my opinion, I can think of one issue of on the bilateral agenda between Turkey and Israel. I don't know of one border that they share, or one refugee, one security, on the bilateral agenda. So I would like, this could be, potentially kind of an opportunity for repivoting here. An interesting element, I would say that Israel's even getting soft power inside Iran with Iranian Azerbaijanis seeing that it's very clear that Israel is helping Azerbaijan, and with great enthusiasm always among Iranian Azerbaijanis for Turkey, but also now a lot for Israel. It's pretty surprising. And then just maybe two sort of general points, and I will wrap it up. One, this is I think we should be, everyone who studies war, studies strategy, studies international relations, needs to look at this war. This is a very 21st century war. Soldiers are not face to face. Soldiers are not in trenches. A lot of this is taking place, with equipment that's being operated outside of the war zone. We're seeing the supremacy of the Western, US, NATO standard, but with Turkish and Israeli maybe improvements, the supremacy of these weapon systems over the Russian weapon systems. That might be difficult for Russia moving forward. We're seeing civilian population and energy infrastructure clear, involved targets. There's no rules. This is 21st century, and then sophisticated disinformation being a big part of the warfare. So I think we'll be studying this a long time about how we fight war now. And then on the other side of studies, and I'm glad we're at South Caucasus University, and I know a lot of friends from universities in the Caucasus are also listening in. I think basically international relations, well, let's just say, I think we've duped the students for the past 30 years, studying international law, international institutions, conflict resolution, track 2, track 3, I don't know, Azerbaijan waited 30 years, believed in all these institutions, what the West was telling them. And then in the end, you see, well, if, you want to change a status quo, basically the military does it easier and quicker than anything else, and creates a new reality. And I don't know what international institutions, conflict resolution groups, diplomacy, what it offered ever to resolve this conflict. So thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brenda. It's good to have experienced speakers. They just guess the questions that I'm going to ask, and they respond to them before asked. So it's very good. I have a small reminder to the attendees, those who are watching this panel. If you are in Zoom, you can ask your question in the Q&A part of the application. If you look down in the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A part there. You can ask your questions there. We are not going to allow people to ask live questions. So if you write there, we will try to answer. And also those who are watching through the Facebook, you can write your questions there in the Facebook, and we will get those questions to ask to the speakers. So now the last speaker of tonight of webinar is Mithat Çelikbala. He is again looking into the situation as a whole and giving us his opinion. I also asked him to maybe a little bit more concentrate on Turkey, Russia, and Georgia as a regional country. Nobody talks about Georgia, even less than Iran, actually. So Georgia is caught up in all this conflict. Only South Caucasus country who's not part of the conflict. So it should be a difficult position. Mithat.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hocam. It's my pleasure as well to take part in this activity. This is the lively issue in those days. As we are discussing, Azerbaijan and Armenia are involving in heavy fighting in this supposedly frozen conflict, despite the fact that Russian brokered ceasefire is on the table. And for the first time, the parties do not take part and do not take it and continue their fighting. And obviously, Azerbaijan had been preparing for this eventuality. Their counter-strike was not a spur-of-the-moment reaction. It was well organized and studied one. The fighting is the worst it has been since 1992, most probably, and encompassing the entire line of contact with the artillery, missile, and drone strikes. The past Armenian lines, as Brenda mentioned, changed the strategy of war in the region, and with the success, it's a different kind of a development for the fight between the armies, and this war, and therefore this war features modern weaponry representing a large-scale conventional conflict between these two states, which will undoubtedly change the long-standing status quo in the region, and for the likelihoods of this conflict becoming a broader regional war, this is low, but it should not be dismissed a distant war between small states, and this is the case, and this is very important in this region. In other words, how can I say, conflict paving the way for a new logic of escalation, which the likelihood of a major war is increasingly obvious. Maybe not this time, but in the near future, that's a possibility within the region itself. And how can we understand, or much of the coverage of this conflict centers on what pillars? I may say that 3 of them, and then afterwards I may move to Turkey, maybe Russia and Georgia, other regional actors as well. The first one is, again, the other previous speakers mentioned erosions. There was a formal negotiation that was launched in 1992, which had essentially produced no concrete results on the ground. And this is a serious issue. For almost 30 years, 3 decades, and occupation has continued, and Azerbaijani refugees and IDPs have been prevented from exercising their own right of return. And for nearly 3 decades of OSCE-led negotiations, whose objectives were clearly and unambiguously set down on a paper, none of the Minsk group's defined objectives have been achieved, not even close. And the end result is this clashes. And secondly, we see a kind of a merger between geopolitics of the Middle East, the Caucasus, Black Sea region, and Eastern Mediterranean. Many actors are involving in this new geopolitical environment, and the new actors, geopolitical actors, in fact, those actors are over there already, but for the international community, those new actors, for example, Turkey and some others, are involving in this new geopolitics, and this new geopolitics is totally different than 1990s geopolitics. The third one is most to a kind of approach and the negotiations since the Velvet Revolution, and then Azerbaijani's response to this development. From that point on, there are many discussions. All of those regional actors and leaders are criticizing Turkey to involve in this issue militarily. Even the Armenia's Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan stated that the international community must strongly condemn aggressive actions and aggression of Azerbaijan and Turkey as well. Demand that Turkey leaves the region as a military presence of Turkey in South Caucasus does not promise any good. This is the evaluation of Pashinyan, an Armenian side. This aggressive actions and aggression of Turkey and Azerbaijan is wrong and unfair for Turkey's decision makers. This is irresponsible and baseless statement. This is not, of course, my evaluation, but the evaluation of Turkish President and Turkish Foreign Minister. Officials declined these accusations, and Turkish troops are not the front line. There are many accusations of Turkey's involvement, including those radical groups from Syria or Libya and different regions. And technically, it seems that Azerbaijanis do not need such a kind of a support from Turkey and or involvement of all those actors. For Turkey, Azerbaijan and Turkey share strategic ties and brotherly relations, and it's known, one nation, two states. It's very famous, and we know it. And for Turkey, Azerbaijan and rated its support to Azerbaijan against Armenian border attacks, according to a national security statement last week. And Turkey is actively supporting Azerbaijan. And President Erdogan condemned the Armenian occupation of Azerbaijan territory and cope its aggression and withdraw from Azerbaijani lands it's occupying. We see Turkey for the first time involving very actively what's happening between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Turkey was always there, but this time very overtly, openly declaring its support. And then Turkey's support is the key to understand the strategic timing of Azerbaijan's counterattack, I guess. Because we know Ankara remains Baku's key military ally, and Turkey is already supporting Azerbaijan militarily through technical assistance, through arms sales, providing a critical military support, especially in terms of armed drones and technical expertise. And this bilateral defense cooperation between Turkey and Azerbaijan defines two legal frameworks. Not a new phenomenon. It's an old and constructed cooperation between Turkey and Azerbaijan. The first one is, which was established in the early 1990s, enables military training for Azerbaijani personnel in Turkish military institutions, both in Azerbaijan and in Turkey. And the second framework is much more important than that. This is kind of strategic partnership agreement, as you know, which explicitly states that the two countries will help each other if one of them demanded its right to self-defense under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. This is very important for Turkey and Azerbaijan. And although the nature of this assistance was subject to a bilateral consultations, the agreement clearly affirmed the possibility of using military means in the emergence of circumstances. And today we have new news, and those news mention this Armenian assault to Nakhchivan region and other cities of Azerbaijan, and this is a serious concern. And therefore we have to follow what's happening on the field very seriously. What is else beyond that? Why Turkey is there? We see Turkey from the beginning, and you should remember this Trabzon Declaration of 2012 between Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Georgia that links Azerbaijan and Georgia to the issue. Turkey is establishing its own Caucasus in this geography with the participation of Azerbaijani and Georgian partners, and Turkey's interests are aligning with the West, not with the Russia in this new Caucasus. Therefore, we need to see Turkey's situation from this perspective. And as we all know, the mutual distrust prevailing in the region has consequently led these countries to the region and to pursue a kind of a cooperation with the actors of the side of the region. In this federation, both as a regional and a global power or player that could be defined as a cohesion state due to its connection with the Northern Caucasus, of course, in the region. On the other hand, we have Turkey and Iran as the other regional actors or regional powers, which play an effective role in shaping the region with their historical, cultural, and contemporary links and interests. And then, especially since the collapse of the Soviet Union, we were part of those discussions for a long while. Two main strategic axes of alliance: the strategic axis of Turkey, Azerbaijan, Georgia, vis-a-vis the strategic axis of Armenia and Iran. This is very important, and we see these signals, but there are some changes as well. For example, whereas the latter axis is accepted as a continuation of a traditional structure, which assumes the domination of Russia's regional expectations and geopolitical sub-region excluded from the rest of the world, the former Turkey, Georgia, and Azerbaijan reflects the effort of constructing a prosperous, pluralistic, and modern region with Euro-Atlantic alliance as well. But last couple of years, we see that those regional actors are far away from attracting the attention of the West, including US and the UN as well, EU as well. Therefore, we have a different region. And for Turkey and Russia, is there a possibility to yes, that is the case, but I see a kind of a covered agreement between two parties, Russia and Turkey, because the two actors has a kind of an experience in Syria, in Iraq, in East Mediterranean and other regions to discuss those issues. I don't want to say that they agreed to change the structure or geopolitical environment in the Caucasus and other regions, but the parties have a kind of an agreement or kind of a experience to discuss some issues. And this one is one of them. And why they are acting as they are in need of change the environment in the Caucasus because of different stuff. Brenda mentioned energy cooperation and Azerbaijani's activities with Georgia to link the other part of the Caspian to the west. And China is involving in this issue. And for the first time, they passed through the Caspian, and we see trade relations, the middle corridor. And the middle corridor is very important. And this is a kind of an alternative to the north and south. In the north, we have Russia. In the south, we have sea lines. And it's very correlated with this China's Road and Belt initiative as well. It seems that Russia is in need of changing its attitude in the Caucasus. If they would like to take part in those activities, they have to play in a different kind. In this line, who is losing, or the loser is Armenia. Armenia is out of all those regional initiatives, and it's very serious concern for Armenia. And for Georgia, we see very silent Georgia in all those developments. But it is very important for Georgia because Georgia has its own experience with Russia in 2008. And now all the regional actors looking at the issue from this perspective, most probably. And therefore, they try to be more silent and trying to observe what's happening. And this is a case for Turkey. For the first time, we see active Turkey. But there is another first, for most probably in the region, Iran's leader, Supreme Leader Khamenei, have a statement, and for the first time in a broad way, he said that Nagorno-Karabakh is Azerbaijani territory, international. There is no doubt on that. Therefore, this is also a game changer. It seems that Azerbaijani operations are still going on, and it will have some effect on the region. And those effects will survive for a long while. Maybe the parties get together. Azerbaijanis may stop at the border of Nagorno-Karabakh for the new negotiations, but the environment has totally changed, Hocam, and then most probably we will see new discussions and new negotiations under those circumstances, and most probably, we don't know yet, Turkey will be on the table together with the other actors, but we will see much more active Turkey with the support of Azerbaijanis, and most probably the other actors without consent, welcome to Turkey's those kind of a role. Let me stop here. I give some clues, most probably for the questions. Depending on the questions and other comments, I may broaden up my comments.
Okay, thank you very much, Mithat. We have actually several questions from the audience coming. So let me start with them instead of asking my questions so that they don't feel left out. If we can go through all these questions, then I'll start asking my questions. Let me start with Niku. A couple of questions is directed to you, and I'll add two. One of them is from a Turkish participant who is asking about the ENP, whether ENP could be an instrument for the frozen conflicts in the neighborhood region, and of course in the South Caucasus. Could normative power of Europe play a constructive role in this region? That was the one question. Another question again to you, Miku, is about Georgia. Actually, Mithat talked already about this, but maybe you can also like to delve into this issue. What is the impact of the conflict on Georgia, and whether Georgia would have a possibility of meaningful role as a mediator or at least a venue for the talks? Of course, this is from a Georgian attendee. So that's also the question. And maybe you just start from there. And if you have some expectation how this conflict will evolve from now on, I would like to hear that also myself. Thank you.
Thank you. I will start by taking the question on the European neighborhood policy. Listen, it's hard for the European Union to do something somewhere where the local actors don't really want the EU to do much. And in this sense, as long as Armenia and Azerbaijan do not really have an interest of really getting the EU on board, the Europeans are in a situation where they cannot force and impose their role on this. Of course, the EU will have, and the EU member states will make diplomatic statements, but there is not a way for the Europeans to act in any military or massive economic/financial way without the sides to the conflict wanting it. And as you see, Europe is actually not very good at playing significant roles in war situations, like in Libya, like in Syria, like in Nagorno-Karabakh now. That's the nature of the European Union. Having said that, I think the EU played a major role in, making sure the war in Ukraine doesn't grow much bigger by imposing sanctions on Russia. That's a bit of an exception. But if we're not talking, EU sanctions on these conflict sides, I don't see the EU playing a big role before the sides agree on something. If and when Armenia and Azerbaijan agree on something, then the Europeans, I'm sure, will find a few billion euro to do post-conflict rehabilitation in the conflict zones. If this needs to sweeten the peel of the deal for the Armenian and Azerbaijani publics outside the conflict zones, I'm sure there will be funds for that. And there will be, peacekeepers if the EU is asked. But before Armenia and Azerbaijan agree on something, it will be hard. Georgia, to be frank, I don't think the problem Azerbaijan and Armenia have is lack of good mediators. The problem they have is different. Again, you need a good mediator when both sides kind of think they should solve the conflict. And this is where you get a neutral mediator, Norway in the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, or Switzerland in lots of other situations. Now, Armenia and Azerbaijan don't really look like they desperately need a good mediator. They want something else. So now the only way foreign actors can actually push them towards a solution is through pressure. And this kind of pressure, Georgia is not in a position to apply. And that's why I think at this stage, we're still going back to the kind of bigger players who mediate while at the same time are in a position to force the hands of Baku and Yerevan. And that's back to, Russia, to France, to the United States and Turkey now. And if I can if you allow me to take one question on why is Armenia targeting Azerbaijani towns and Ganja specifically? I mean, there is no way Armenia can resist just by fighting a localized war. The only chance for Armenia to resist is to impose higher costs on Azerbaijani population. And that's a way to offset Azerbaijani military superiority and equipment at this stage. And this is where this war cannot stay localized, because a localized war favors Azerbaijan because it has better drones and better other things, which we're not. And Armenia will escalate this war beyond the occupied districts and beyond Nagorno-Karabakh, but that's the only way it can inflict damage on Azerbaijan in the hope of sending the message, no, it won't be about bombing some empty territories around Nagorno-Karabakh. It will also hurt, and that's the situation of war. So in this sense, this is one of his drivers that shows that this war cannot be contained and will not be just in Jebrail and Kelbajar and, Stepanakert or Hankendi, as you want to call it, right? And that will be a dynamic that is there as long as the fighting continues.
Okay, thank you very much, Miku. Actually, this answers the question of Furkan Terzi also, and maybe partly Ünal Çeviköz, but I will ask Ünal Çeviköz's question to Brenda Schaffer too. He is asking about the shelling of Nakhchivan, which is closer to in areas closer to Iranian border rather than the north. What is the tactical motive here? That's the question. The bombing, maybe presumably joining the Megri corridor or not. That's a kind of a strategic question, of course. There was on the Facebook side, there is a question directed to Brenda from an Armenian participant. I think she is saying that Azerbaijan was bombing Stepanakert, Hankendi a week before anything was hit Ganja. Why do you think that? What do you think about this? There are a couple of questions about Turkey and Israel. Actually, you opened up the question, of course. One of the questions is whether Israeli, Azerbaijani and Turkish-Azerbaijani cooperations would help to develop Turkish-Israeli relation. Of course, this is what you opened up. Maybe you might follow that question. There is a specific question on energy. Maybe you would like to take that from Pınar İpek from Turkey. To what extent the ongoing conflict would have an effect on increasing the TANAP pipeline capacity? Would it postpone Shah Deniz Phase 3 or cancel potentially bringing Turkmenistan gas for TANAP? And there is a question from our Ukrainian friend, Volodymyr Dubovik, from Odessa University. He's asking about the U.S. position. He says that U.S. is notably missing in the discussions and on the ground. And some people lamented this, and people are complain about this administration's uninterested and disengaged position. But the question is, would it be realistic to expect more active and effective intervention on the part of some other administration? Does the US have any leverage here? So those are the questions for you.
Great. Okay, thank you, Mustafa. First thing on the escalation and the involvement of civilians. As pointed out, I think Defense Minister Totonian's strategy is very clear here. Move it out of, as Nico also said, not to focus on the occupied territories, but try to move it, whether it's to Nakhchivan, Ganja, other places. I think what doesn't work with this strategy is that how Azerbaijani society has changed fundamentally since the early years of the war in 1992, 1994. Azerbaijan's become a real state. At the time, there was hardly really, during that war, a full military. It was very, divided period in Azerbaijan. Today, no one is going to flee their homes. No one, despite the shelling and the people are not going to, turn against the government. They're actually, you're seeing a sort of very wide sort of mobilization, including of the Azerbaijani political opposition, in favor of this war effort. So I don't think that while it's clear it's the Armenian strategy, I don't think it's going to work in the way that it worked in the early 90s. No one's going to get, is going to flee the zone, the military zones. Second, well, the shelling of Stepanakert and Hankendi, clearly, and you see by the sort of the pace of the Azerbaijani military, their doctrine right now is try to remove military targets before they actually go in with soldiers. Again, this is a very high-tech war taking place. It's not like the line of contact has been for the past 30 years. We really, I've been there, I've been to the line of contact. You really have, it almost is like World War I. We have trenches where you see soldiers basically looking at each other. This is a completely different warfare, more like how the US fights part of the war in Afghanistan and Iraq, where someone could be sitting in Colorado with a joystick and hitting military targets from physically being very far away. So clearly Azerbaijan wants to remove the military forces in Shusha and Stepanakert Khankendi before they even approach those areas. Definitely, it's a opportunity for Turkey, Israel. Again, it's a kind of funny. I can't say it conflict because I can't think of one issue and what
Brenda is frozen, I think. Dimitri, is it the same for you here? Yes. All right.
We're back?
Are you back, Brenda? Yes, you are back.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I started talking about Turkey and Israel and then it froze.
Exactly, yes.
I don't know. So clearly it's an opportunity. I don't see one issue on the bilateral agenda. Turkey and Israel have some different issues related to third parties. On the bilateral agenda, if someone could tell me about any disputed territory between Israel and Turkey, any refugees, Turkish refugees, Israeli refugees that somehow, any way that they directly impinge on each other's security, that would be surprising. And I think that Azerbaijan and Azerbaijan's position is very popular among Turkish society. We saw this when Turkey tried to do the Geneva Protocols and to forge, relations with Armenia, and how unpopular this was without resolution or some sort of advancement in the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict. So I think the fact that Israel and Azerbaijan have a close relationship, like I said, I think it gives it soft power in Iran for Israel, and also, kind of reawakening the idea, hey, really, why is there a conflict between Turkey and Israel? We have a lot of common issues on many issues, including Syria, including and in the Caucasus. Pinar's question on the energy. So yeah, I think something that some of the press is missing is that, the first stage, as Pinar obviously knows, there's 25-year contracts for the Southern Gas Corridor. They're already, locked in place. There's no question about the first phase. I think part of the Armenian-Russian interest in the July attacks was to try to influence what would happen with the second phase, meaning that, sort of maybe to put a chill on potential consumer interest. But so many things, probably by the time that there's really concrete decisions about contracting a third stage of Shaftanis or the second stage of the Southern Gas Corridor, probably things will be very different in the battlefield. And in terms of Turkmen gas, that's still far from a reality. So sure, this can have some impact, but I think there's bigger problems with getting Turkmen gas to market than just this issue.
There's one more question. I think it's to you also. Can Israeli support for Azerbaijan influence U.S. policy on the Nagorno-Karabakh war?
Partially, because of the close alliance between Israel and the United States, but I think because of the problematic relationship right now between Turkey and Israel, there's less appetite, let's say, among American Jewish organizations, to take a stand on something in Turkey's favor. I find I think that there's a very it is, I think it's not so much connected to Israel, but more connected to that part of the more problematic relations between Turkey and Israel are also spilled over into the American Jewish arena as well.
Okay. Mithat, there are some questions similar actually to each other, so I will ask them all one after another. One is Nagorno-Karabakh turning into a proxy war between Turkey and Russia? That's from Melik Alkan. a kind of a similar question from an anonymous attendee. When Turkey and Russia take sides for different countries in this, is this caused by tension among them? So it's kind of similar. Another question, again, hinting the similar issue, was tension in the Middle East actually a hint of tension in the South Caucasus? And another question, what will be the future of Turkish-Russian and Turkish-Armenian relations be like? So maybe you can take both. And there is an interesting question. I didn't know this at all. Maybe it's just a speculation from I think an Azerbaijani attendee, Yelena Abdullayeva. She's asking if whether there is any information from the Turkish government about resettling the Syrian refugees of Turkic origin into Azerbaijani liberated territories. This is presuming quite long. Azerbaijan liberates occupied territories, and then there might be possibility of resettling Syrian refugees of Turkic origin into those territories. It seems that some Armenian sources saying that there are already 15,000 settlers in Karabakh from Syria of Armenian origin. So whether this could be kind of in return policy. I think these are enough for now, this term.
Hocam, and it's interesting, in fact. The Russian Foreign Intelligence Service recently issued a statement, most probably you are aware of it, and they say that Nagorno-Karabakh, like a magnet, attracts militants from various kinds of international terrorist structures to the Nagorno-Karabakh region. Initially, there were many accusations on Turkey that Turkey is using mercenaries from international terrorist organizations fighting in the Middle East, mainly in Syria, in particular, this Jabhat al-Nusra or Hamza and Sultan Murad divisions whatsoever, some extremist groups as well. But we have many examples since the Chechen war or the 1990s. All those radical groups are moving one region, one spot to another, from Afghanistan to Pakistan, from Chechnya to of course Syria. Now in Libya, there are many rumors, but I don't think that there is well set or organized activity or movement of all those groups. And today, Turkish Defense Ministry spokeswomen give a talk, and it was so strange that and some external actors, official officers, let me say, high-level officers, three-star general is conducting Armenian or Nagorno-Karabakh army and training those guys against Azerbaijani activities and fronts. There are many rumors. For that moment, we don't know. And even this Russian intelligence service statement, it has many wrong statements and wrong perspective. Most probably, we may see some other names or groups that try to support different parties in the action. There are other articles I read for example, from Lebanon or Syria, that those Armenian groups are moving to Nagorno-Karabakh to fight against Azerbaijanis whatsoever. But we don't have any clear information. But this is a fertile ground for all those groups and mercenaries to be active on the spot. Therefore, I don't know. But from this Russia stuff, I don't think that Nagorno-Karabakh or Syria is a kind of a proxy war between Turkey and Russia. Because both actors are not equal to each other, and they have their different activities. I many times I'm just saying that Turkey's and Russia's interests and vital interests are much more different than each other. They in all those neighboring regions, in the Caucasus, in the Middle East, in the Eastern Mediterranean. But those parties, Turkey and Russia, I mean, have an experience very lately that to work on those issues. But both parties failed to offer any resolution to any issue in all those regions. They just follow the status quo to utilize and to use those issues for the sake of having some interest on realizing their power in those regions. But the Caucasus is a little bit different than Middle East, Syria and Iraq. We have to be careful on this issue. What is different, most probably, is we see active involvement of Turkey for the first time at that level, militarily, I mean. But this is not a kind of a proxy war. Most probably, parties are in need of balancing. And from this point, is it possible to see any kind of a new phase in Turkish Armenian or Turkish or Russian Azerbaijani relations? Let's see. But I don't see any prospective initiative from our Armenian side to normalize the issue under those circumstances, especially since those rapprochement processes, Turkey take this part, and I don't expect any kind of a change in this development. For Turkey and Russia, we are going to see the limits of cooperation. For the moment, parties are managed to look at the full side of, or the positive aspect of the relationship, but still going on. Let me say some short words for this Ünal-based comment. Most probably, I agree with Brenda. The Armenian side is trying to broaden the front in different pieces and to distract the attention of Azerbaijani military force, most probably in different parts of the front, or they may try to push Turkey to mobilize or to move towards the border. We don't see any kind of a mobilization of Turkish army or troops in the Eastern Anatolia or in the other Armenian border as well. And they do.
Can I ask you as well? Take into account that Turkey has a guarantee regarding Nahchivan, not similar guarantee to Azerbaijan, but there is a Turkish guarantee for the Nahchivan. So maybe you should think about this and answering as well.
Exactly. From the beginning, for as far as Nahchivan is concerned, and Turkey's involvement in the region since 1990s, early 1990s, is a serious issue and historical thing. You just remember what happened in Georgia in 2008. You remember in Batumi, for example. Historically, many people in the region, even in the region, believes that Georgians as well, Turkey has some guarantees or some basic legal rights in all those regions to protect the status quo. And therefore, this is the case. If Armenian side taking this issue into account and trying to push Turkey to the field, it's going to be a regional war. But I don't think that Azerbaijanis and Turkish side play this game, because it has some serious effects on all those regional developments. And for the region, Middle East and the Caucasus, it's already linked to each other. You remember Russian operations in Syria and in northern Iraq. They use this Caspian and Azerbaijani airspace very actively, and therefore it's the case. And therefore we have to be careful in these kind of developments in the region.
Okay, thank you. I think we are almost towards the end, but the questions keep coming. But let me have one more round, and I will ask you to talk about your own views about the future. How are we going to go from here? Maybe also you would answer some of the questions as well. Niku, there is a question about France. What agency do you think France can have as a mediator in the conflict, given Aliyev's recent declaration? I think, yeah, you could take this as well, but also give us your view for the future, and then we'll move on.
Okay, thank you. It's hard to say what will happen with the French role. I see these tensions, but I mean, that is why mediators are mediators, because they're not supposed to be entirely playing on the side of one or the other actor. And for all of Russia's neutrality, tactical neutrality at this stage, that's not strategic neutrality. I think for Russia it's pretty obvious that Armenia is an ally for the longer term. Azerbaijan might regain some territories, but Russia's red lines, in my view, are not entirely, in accordance with what Azerbaijan considers as its legitimate end game over Nagorno-Karabakh. There was a question as to whether, Stepanakert is a Russian red line, and I don't know, but my feeling is that most of Nagorno-Karabakh might be a Russian red line. Otherwise, it gets too much. It's becoming too much of a Russian disrespect of allies and humiliation almost. So I would not. That's now on Turkey, Russia. I want to say a couple of things. You see Russia being extremely careful in its messaging on Turkey. You see Russian resilience and appetite to be on good terms with Turkey at incredibly high levels. The smallest statement from some European, let alone American country immediately provokes a lot of irritation in Moscow and a pushback. And what we've seen in recent years, from the shooting down of the airplane, from the assassination of the Russian ambassador in Turkey, to what is happening now, you see Russia having incredible amounts of capacity to overcome these tactical irritants in relations with Turkey and get back to a positive agenda. That's still the case. And I think the big game in Russia's mind around it is that Russia sees that now it's a great moment that it needs to ram in delinking Turkey from the rest of NATO and the Euro-Atlantic community. And all of this Russian desire not to be irritated by Turkish action, either in Libya or in Syria or in Nagorno-Karabakh, has behind this belief in Russia that there's a momentum of pushing forward and deepening the rift between Turkey and the United States and Europe. And this momentum is something that serves Russia well, and that's part of a Russian desire to grind American power down, if you want. That's my reading, and I think Russia will have this resilience and will treat Turkey very, very positively, as long as Russia still plays this game, and as long as it thinks that this rift between Turkey and the rest of NATO can be deepened. Once the break is there, I'm not sure Turkey will be this respected and carefully managed ally. I don't know, we can project things into the future, but Russia being nice to Turkey is done for very specific purposes. It's not done, as a kind of way to respect Turkish interest. It's done to weaken America. And once this is done, for Russia, there's all kinds of opportunities vis-a-vis Turkey, vis-a-vis Azerbaijan, vis-a-vis Ukraine, and many other places.
Thank you, Nico. So, Brenda, same question to you. How do you see this conflict is playing out? And also, there is a question regarding possible Joe Biden presidency. Would it increase U.S. involvement in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, and how? But okay, I'm very much interested. How do you see this conflict is panning out now?
Right. So I think it's far from over. As I pointed out, some important changes have taken place in Azerbaijani society, statehood over the last 30 years, and also the successes in the battlefield. If up until maybe 6 months ago, Armenia always could have had at any juncture, all of the areas where traditionally Armenians have settled. Let's recall going back to the protocols that, basically Turkey had offered Armenia if they would just deoccupy one district with barely with any settlement. They basically could have opened up full relations and trade with Turkey. That in the world, even just getting out of one of these occupied districts would have probably put Armenia as the image of the peacemaker, Once trade was open with Turkey, it would have created so many opportunities for Armenia. It would also lessen its dependence on Russia. But in 2010, Armenia was not willing to give up even one district, right? So obviously now the situation is completely changed, and I'm not sure that Azerbaijan will go back to any of those previous formulations, and that basically were to the Azerbaijani to the Armenian advantage. So I don't think this is over. I don't think this is just to grab some territory. Like it's not like, for instance, something similar to 1973, where Egypt was able to give Israel a big kick and then go into the negotiations, kind of as equal partners, and starting, and sort of rechange the view of history and create a peace agreement. I think it's very different, and that I don't think that this is just to set the stage for negotiations. And also, I think something we're all mentioning, that Russia's behavior is very different than in the past. I believe it's calculated. I don't think in any way, again, it's just happening by chance. But we know Russia has so many levers to influence the outcome of the war, to stop the war, and so far it's let this continue. So there's new Russian behavior here. That's also a calculation that I think we don't really know exactly what Russia is trying to do, and it's probably not like in the past, where Russia just wants to convene some negotiations and calm things down, and and also be the peacemaker. So about how would the Biden administration treat this conflict? I would say that, well, there's two potential answers. I think it's a bigger question right now in the United States. There's really two poles, major poles in the pole in terms of polls, I mean POLE, polls in the Democratic Party, more traditional Democrats, which Joe Biden represents, or a more what they call progressive side of the Democratic Party, probably Kamala Harris, and the Bernie Sanders coalition, which is still part of the Biden coalition. I mean, that it's not just Biden, but something wider. So the Biden team has some outstanding people who have a lot of experience on the Caucasus, Russia, Turkey. If that team is running, if Biden's elected, and if that team is running the foreign policy, it would probably be even some good news for Turkey. People that understand the strategic importance of Turkey, have a lot of experience, and seeing how important Turkey's role is for all the bordering regions of Turkey, and really some excellent and experienced people that many of you know. But if the other pole of the Democratic Party has more influence over foreign policy, and then this could be, not the traditional Democratic Party, and something that's probably not so familiar. Maybe we saw this a bit towards the end of the Obama administration, but a completely different type of foreign policy and approach to foreign policy. So I think it really will be dependent. I think it's a big question to Americans in general, which pole of the Democratic Party is really, the flag on.
Good. We are all watching what's going to happen. Okay. A question. Oh, where did I put the question? Here. All right. Mithat, same for you. Of course, how do you see this is playing out? But also two specific questions. Maybe you can also take them. One is about the S-400 test being conducted in Sinop, or at least it's speculated that it's being tested in Sinop. Is it a friendly gesture towards Russia to come up with an expected shared understanding over the conflict in the Caucasus, or is it a completely different issue at all? Another question is about that Turkey of today is not the Turkey of 1991. Do Turkey now export insecurity to the Caucasus? So you took these two questions also, but also give me your last words so that we can finish on time. You have about 4.5 minutes.
Okay, Hocam. I agree. It's far from over, this clash, and because why? There is a political will and determination in Azerbaijani side to resolve or liberate all those occupied territories, including Nagorno-Karabakh. And for Armenian side, it is an interesting and it's very important aspect of their national identity, and therefore they do not want to leave those territories very easily. And we saw this is the reason why we have 3-decade frozen conflict there. But the Madrid principle is the basics of the limitation, most probably, in the resolution of this issue, peaceful negotiations. But it necessitates the end of Armenian military occupation of these lands and return of hundreds of thousands Azerbaijani civilians to their homes, not the Syrian, of course, refugees and other groups. Even the priorities, Azerbaijanis and international communities support to it. It seems that Yerevan's evident categorical occupation to end moment. And it seems that Yerevan has overplayed its hand and did not think Baku would respond decisively to what amounts to a war of attrition, in part because of it. They overestimated extent of their own external backing. This is a failure of Armenian statecraft, most probably. Therefore, I don't see any easy end to this conflict. For this Turkey's involvement and the presence in the region, I'm not sure that Turkey is exporting insecurity to the region, and Turkey's attitude is the same in the region, and all those agreements with Azerbaijan and Georgia and other regional countries, actors show that Turkey is there, and this is an active part of Turkish foreign policy. And there are very critical aspects of it. We are part of those criticisms in Turkey as well, a very aggressive Turkey, instead of being a soft power, like what happened in the last 2 decades in the region. Partly Turkey is changing its attitude domestically and externally, and this is a serious concern for many Turks as well. But I don't think that Turkey will be a kind of irredentist and fighting force in the Caucasus or in other regions for the moment, because of the geopolitical aspects and realities of the region. For S-400 stuff being tested, it's a new stuff. They moved to those but S-400s to Sinop, the Black Sea coast. It's far away from the south or Ankara as well, or the west, the Turkish Greek, or what's happening in Cyprus. And there were very new rumors. It was a surprise for many because there's a field to test, available field to test those infrastructure. I don't know whether it's a gesture to Russia or to secure Turkey's issues and attitudes just before the American elections. Most probably Ankara is observing Washington and elections much more seriously than watching Moscow in those days. Therefore, I don't know. And we just think this issue from the words of Russian foreign minister. He said Turkey is not our ally, but a kind of a partner in different issues. Therefore, this is another message to Ankara from Moscow. Most probably we think and we see new developments in the region. Therefore, I don't take this S-400 issue a serious sign related with the Caucasus for the moment. We need to see some new developments afterwards. Let me stop here.
Okay, this is excellent because we planned 90 minutes and it's 1 minute less than 90 minutes. So I have to thank now, first of all, to the attendees. They are stick with us tonight, both on the Facebook and also in the Zoom here. I'd like to thank them. And of course, our speakers. I mean, despite all the demands of home life from us, all of us, we just briefly saw Niku's small kid there. I'd like to thank Mithat and Niku and Brenda. Thank you very much. It's been very nice to see you, albeit online. And also, of course, I'd like to thank Center for International and European Studies of Kadir Has University and Panorama Journal for putting up this event. We will have no doubt more. Dimitris, to you.
Oh, well, thank you to
Give
all.
last word.
Thank you for sticking with us, and Niku in particular, who is pressed with family issues. I was just thinking, the last thing I wanted to say, last week, Mustafa and I were on a panel for a Georgian university talking about the Black Sea, and one of our fellow panelists is someone who is part of the Biden team, someone who actually said that the Madrid principles were written on his computer. And he basically was saying to us that they're dead. I mean, that was his take on what's happening right now. And we are, I mean, I was just thinking about the whole conversation. So it's interesting linking that to what, Ted Carpenter was telling us at that other event. So it's something to consider. But this has been an incredible event. And thank you very much to all of you for taking part.
It's our
Thank
pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hope to see you again all.
Next year in Istanbul.
Hopefully.
Well, maybe Monterey would be nice.
Also, Monterey and Istanbul.
And Paris and Washington and everywhere else. We need to travel.
Yeah.
You know, Brenda, we cannot
Yeah.
see each other even in Istanbul now.
All right.
Bye.
Teşekkür ediyorum.
Bye.
Teşekkürler.
Bye bye.
Everyone, bye bye.